In 2022, 4 MIT students forked an open-source code editor. No funding, no press, no product announcement. Within 3 years, that editor would be used by half the Fortune 500, and the company behind it would turn down an acquisition offer from OpenAI. This is the story of Cursor, and it's stranger than anything the press has told you. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand 3 things that most coverage of Cursor completely misses. First, why 4 students with no enterprise sales team built one of the fastest-growing software products in history. Second, what actually happened when OpenAI tried to buy them, and why the answer was no. And third, the situation Cursor is in right now that nobody in tech seems to want to talk about directly. The company whose models Cursor runs on is also now its most dangerous competitor. I spent several weeks going through the funding announcements, the forum posts, the rare interviews, and the public financial data to piece this together. Here's what I found. In 2022, 4 MIT students, Truell, Sualeh Asif, Arvid Lunnemark, and Aman Sanger, started a company called AnySphere. The product they were building wasn't new in concept. A code editor with AI built in. Microsoft already owned GitHub Copilot. JetBrains was working on something similar. Amazon would eventually build its own. What Truell and his co-founders did was take VS Code, the dominant open-source code editor with over 70 million users, and fork it. Not clone it, not compete with it, build on top of it, which meant every developer who already knew VS Code could switch to Cursor in minutes. The friction was almost zero. The first real signal came from Hacker News and Twitter. Developers started sharing it not because a PR firm told them to, but because it solved a problem they actually had. Not AI that suggests completions, AI that understood the entire code base, that could be asked a question, that could rewrite a whole file, not just a line. This distinction matters. GitHub Copilot was autocomplete on steroids. Cursor was something closer to a conversation. The growth that followed didn't come from a sales team cold calling CTOs. It came from developers showing other developers. A developer at a startup would use it, hit a moment where it did something that felt almost impossible, and send a screenshot to their team chat. Within 12 months of launch, Cursor had reached $100 million in annual recurring revenue. For context, Wiz, one of the fastest B2B SaaS companies in history, took 18 months to hit that number. Deal took 20 months. Ramp took around 24. Cursor did it faster than any of them, and no one was really paying attention yet. By May 2025, Cursor had crossed $500 million in annual recurring revenue. That's not the remarkable part. The remarkable part is what came next. 5 months later, October 2025, they hit $1 billion. They doubled their revenue in 5 months. More than 1 million paying customers. Average revenue per customer, around $276 per year. And by early 2026, $2 billion. Half of the Fortune 500 is now using Cursor. Not piloting it, using it. The companies that used to make enterprise software sales decisions over 18-month procurement cycles, those companies had developers who just started using Cursor on their own, and eventually the tool became impossible to remove. This is what's called product-led growth. And it's the detail that explains everything about how 4 students with no traditional enterprise sales operation built something that the biggest technology companies in the world couldn't replicate fast enough. The funding world noticed. In 2025, Cursor raised 3 separate rounds in quick succession. Total raised $3.3 billion. Investors: Andreessen Horowitz, NVIDIA, Google. The valuation went from $2.5 billion to $29.3 billion in a single year. And then OpenAI called. The details of what was discussed have never been fully reported. What is known is that at some point in 2025, OpenAI was interested in acquiring Cursor. The founders said no. This decision, turning down one of the most powerful companies in AI, a company backed by Microsoft, a company whose models were embedded in the most popular developer tool on the planet, is the decision that defines what AnySphere is actually trying to become. They aren't building a feature, they aren't building a tool, they're building something they believe could be central to how software gets written for a very long time. Saying yes to OpenAI would have meant folding that ambition into someone else's roadmap. They said no. What they didn't know, or maybe they did and said no anyway, was that the bigger conflict was still coming. To understand what happened next, you need to understand Cursor's technical dependency. Cursor is, at its core, an interface. A very good interface. A very well-designed interface. But an interface built on top of AI models that AnySphere does not own. The models that made Cursor feel almost magical to developers, the ones that understood context, rewrote files, held long conversations about architecture, those were Claude models, built by Anthropic. In May 2025, Anthropic launched Claude Code, a terminal-based AI coding agent designed for exactly the workflow that Cursor had spent 3 years making the default choice for developers. The company that provides the intelligence behind Cursor's best experience, the company that, in a meaningful sense, Cursor's product quality depends on, launched a product that competes directly with Cursor. Let that settle for a moment, because here's the part that makes this genuinely strange. Anthropic still sells API access to Cursor. When a Cursor user runs Claude 3.5 Sonnet on their codebase, Anthropic gets paid. When that same user considers switching to Claude Code instead, Anthropic gets paid. Anthropic is, in a very real sense, supplying weapons to both sides of this conflict. The developer community noticed. On Reddit and Hacker News, the question appeared repeatedly: why would you use Cursor when the model powering your best Cursor experience is now available as a standalone coding agent? This is the question Anisphere has to answer. And then, July 2025 happened. In July 2025, Cursor triggered what became known as a pricing incident. The details: a change in how privacy mode worked meant that users who believed their code was being processed only on their local machines found that it was, under certain conditions, being sent to external servers. The response on developer forums was immediate and sharp. Privacy is not a minor concern for the people building software products. It's often a legal requirement. Michael Truell issued a public apology. The incident passed, but it was the first time the public saw what happens when trust becomes the variable in this equation. Because trust is exactly what Cursor is now betting everything on. The obvious play for a company in Cursor's position, dependent on a competitor's infrastructure, is to build your own. And that's exactly what they're doing. Composer is Anisphere's proprietary AI model. Composer 2 scored 61.3 on Cursor Bench, the internal benchmark Anisphere uses to measure coding model performance. This matters for a specific reason. If Cursor can build a model that matches or exceeds Claude's coding performance, they no longer need to depend on Anthropic for the quality of their product. The business model transforms. Instead of great interface plus someone else's intelligence, it becomes great interface plus our own intelligence. But the gap between good benchmark score and better than Claude 3.5 Sonnet at the specific tasks developers actually care about is not a small gap. Anthropic has spent years and enormous capital building and refining models that developers trust. Trusting a model with your production codebase is different from trusting it with a benchmark. And so Cursor finds itself navigating something that few companies have had to navigate at this speed and at this scale. A product that is genuinely transformative to the people who use it, a business model that requires either resolving the dependency on a competitor or deepening the trust fast enough that the dependency doesn't matter. A company that said no to OpenAI because they believe they're building something that will last. And a question that nobody can answer yet: what happens when the companies who built the intelligence that made you decide they want your users? That question doesn't have an answer yet. What we do know is that in 3 years, 4 students built a product that half the Fortune 500 uses. That turned down an acquisition from one of the most powerful companies in technology that is now building the infrastructure to be independent of the company whose models power it. Whether that's possible is the most interesting open question in developer tools right now. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about this story. Cursor's growth didn't come from a pitch deck or a sales playbook. It came from developers sharing something with other developers, because it made them feel for the first time like the tool was actually working with them. That kind of adoption is almost impossible to manufacture, and almost impossible to take away once it's real. Here's the question I want to leave you with, and I'm genuinely curious what you think. If you're a developer who uses Cursor, what would it actually take for you to switch? Is it model quality? Is it trust? Is it price? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If you want more stories like this, real ones, with the numbers and the decisions and the things that don't usually make the headline, I publish these every week. The next one is already in production.